All right, hello. Welcome to the virtual brown bag of January the 14th of 2021. So, as usual, we do record these meetings. So if you are going to be sharing anything that could cause you trouble, just don't. But don't make that prevent you from sharing. Just be mindful of what you would be sharing. What is the virtual brown bag thing? It's a place where we get together, we share tips and tricks on a variety of things. It could be tools, it could be shortcuts, articles, books, what have you. Anything that may have been helpful to you. Hopefully it can be helpful to somebody else. So we just share it out here. Experiences, things that we've learned the hard way, frustrations, difficulties, something that you may be going through that's challenging, just bring it up. Maybe somebody has gone through the same trouble and can give you some insights on, different ways or better ways to do it, or the way to do it. Not supposed to be a one-way conversation, so, feel free to jump in and, make comments or ask questions, whenever you feel like. Logistics, we do this every Thursday from 12 to 1 Central Time here on Skype. You're welcome to join us anytime, and also, help us spread the word and, invite coworkers or friends who could be benefiting from this content. The more, the merrier. What have we shared before? We've been through, a host of different topics. It can range from very deep technical things related to programming languages or patterns or what have you, as well as maybe some soft skills things or things around like user stories and Scrum related things, agile practices. Again, whatever, whoever is sharing the thing has been going through, more than welcome to share that. We have a website, the virtualbrownbag.com website, where you can always find the links to the previous recordings, as well as information about the next one and a little thing that you can click on and add it as a reminder to your calendar, stuff like that. And other than that, let's roll. Anything would like to get us started? I have a couple things here that I just jotted down that I can be sharing, but as usual, first ask anybody with anything that you're dying to share with us. George, I can see you talk, but I cannot hear you. No, still. Oh, wait.
So I do have one.
Yeah, go for it.
If you have to take a coding interview for a particular company or a coding test actually, and you get a notification for that test that says it's going to take at least 40 minutes. You have between four. It should take you about 40 minutes to do it, with an upper limit of 1 hour, and you complete the 3 questions in it inside of 10 minutes. Should you be offended that you were even asked to do that, or?
No, that's an hour of time for you.
Yeah,
it's true, but it seems like if you're going to give somebody a coding test, it seems like there should be more resistance from the test itself.
I mean, wouldn't that just mean that they thought you might not be good enough because they have people submitting who are oftentimes not that good?
I don't know, maybe not. I don't know. I was geared up to do it, and when it was 3 questions and they were as simple as it took me 10 minutes to plow through it. I was kind of disappointed because I was expecting a bigger fight. So.
Well, good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want, I recently did triple bytes assessment, and theirs is pretty difficult. I was impressed with that. Like, yeah, y'all should just go and do it. It takes about like 30 to 45 minutes. It's all multiple choice. So I started with it, and I was like, this, multiple choice. I'm gonna breeze through this in like 10 minutes, and I guess I'll say pleasantly surprised. Like, it was not that easy.
What's the name of the test you're referring to, George?
It's triple byte with a BYT. So they're They're I think they like match you to top companies and so on.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So it was, you know, there's like just a general assessment, and I don't know, it might be the sort of thing where it like adapts the question depending on how the previous questions you did, but then it like and later on like gives you a whole curve of how everyone did and where in the curve you fall and so on. So it's pretty. It was pretty cool, and I mean like the general assessment just like expects you to be able to read any programming language and like understand concepts from it and everything. It was like, okay, all right. like the first like 10 minutes of it, I was just like kind of clicking through whatever. I was like, hold on, I need to actually focus on this.
Interesting.
Yeah, I didn't get any of that.
Yeah. Check out Triple Bytes. I mean, if even if just for fun, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, actually, I guess to make it easier for people who will be joining this later, I just pulled up the website and like going through it because I hadn't heard of it before.
Yeah.
It does look really good. So is it like okay, you sign up? Is it a free thing? How does it work?
It is free. You take the assessments and then they like give you, you know, so for me, like they were like, here you're on you have like fast track to take this other longer assessment, which is I just haven't gotten around to doing yet. And then I think they'll just like match you with like companies that use them basically. Which, you know, I bet Dropbox isn't going to be hiring from them much. I don't know if you saw, they're like, yeah, they're laying off like a good chunk of their staff.
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. It's like something like 13% or something of their staff is getting laid off.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, so, you know, I didn't get to the part where it was actually matching me, but I should. I just haven't gotten around to it.
Okay, free for engineers. Yeah. Company space. Okay, got it. Yeah, I was wondering. Okay, how do they make money? Right. Okay.
I will say like I've been freaking struggling with some of these assessment sites. So one of them I'm doing right now. I'm halfway through. I was supposed to do it in one sitting, but it just was impossible. Filtered AI, and so this company asked me to do an assessment on them. And first of all, one thing, they ask you to record like, and I appreciate why they're doing this. This is like not a bad idea. It's just the practicalities. Like they ask you some questions and just ask you to record a video of yourself talking for 3 minutes. You know, you can re-record the video if you're not happy with it, and so on. The problem is the way it's implemented under the hood. I'm pretty sure is, you know, they don't stream back the content. They just kind of record it in the browser and then send it back as like a file upload, which is fine if you have fiber internet. But nowadays, if you have regular old like cable internet or something like that, all the cable providers, in order to make streaming what we're doing now work for everyone, they deprioritize the crap out of any sort of upstream traffic. Like, so I get like 0.1 megabytes a second or something like that, like way less. So I'll record a 3-minute video and then it'll take like 30 minutes to upload, during which you're sitting there waiting. And I mean, like that's a screw up. That's someone writing software that really didn't understand the range of stuff that can happen with over a network. And then their like actual editor, like it forces you to be in the editor while you're doing all the coding, but like has no vim bindings or anything like that, and you can't use dev tools because on their stuff, and also like you can't write code in another editor and then paste it in. It's like way more tightly controlled than it needs to be, and it's just like so frustrating. Like, because in their samples, it actually does allow you to paste in code. So like I wrote out like an entire project on there, and I was like, tried pasting, couldn't. So I had to retype this whole darn thing. It was a freaking nightmare. Yeah.
Very cool. All right.
So if you're involved with writing assessment platforms, please stop it. Stop doing bad things. Be smarter.
They wouldn't have to do that if people weren't trying to, bluff their way through all this stuff, right?
So I mean, like, I don't know. What the heck are you gonna catch with that? That like, yeah, like this thing installs like a plugin so it can monitor your tabs and stuff like that. I'm like, what are you trying to catch? What are you gonna see? That I open some Google questions or well, yeah, that's what everyone does, and that doesn't count against you. And anything, if I wanted to like be sneaky about anything, I'd put it on a second monitor and just use a different browser for it. Like, what is the point? It's like false sense of control.
Well, it's not so much the control for you; it's control for the people that are paying to use the test to filter out potential employees.
Yeah. Oh no, I get it, but it's just false. It doesn't really work. It doesn't exist.
Yeah. I think if you're going to do some kind of like coding test, I think the best way to do it is you bring them in the office and you have to sit there and interact with them while they do it.
Yeah, I would always do it live on a call with them. So like it's not even so much about like controlling the environment and stuff like that. It's just I want to see the company investing as much time as I am. Like don't set up on this weird like off balance thing. And I mean, like, to me, that's like a very important indicator. No, they're serious.
Yeah, I agree. If, for a potential employer, you want them to actually show some interest in you. Whether they're spending time, actually talking to you, as opposed to just throwing all these automated processes in the way to kind of filter you out.
Yeah, and a lot of these companies, like, I don't believe that they're getting all that many like shitty resumes that they couldn't just filter out for everyone else. Like, if you're Microsoft, whatever, yeah, maybe I can buy that. If you're Stripe, whatever, lots of people apply there. Though I still think you probably filter most of them just by hand, really, really easily. But like, a lot of these companies are like, man, how many resumes are you really getting that are just wholly underqualified and you couldn't tell from a resume or a 5-minute conversation? Like, I don't buy it.
Well, I think it's also people who are reviewing initial resumes when they make it to the company. They're not somebody with your skill level. They're in HR.
Right.
So,
but I mean, like, but I'm still saying, like, even from their HR standpoint, like the recruiter, the internal recruiters I've worked with, like, they can generally look at it and be like, well, if experience is required, they can do the experience required. So like, I don't know. Like, I do think a lot of the time all this stuff is thrown up, and it's not because they actually need it and it's the best process. It's because other people are doing, and that's the best idea they have. Like, it's just mimicry, not anything that they actually need.
well, the other thing too is you also have regulations, right? So there's different questions you can and can't ask in interviews and things like that. And I think some of that stuff helps them actually determine if they want to hire you or not, kind of thing. So they're not asking you the question directly, but they're getting the information through another method. So
Yeah.
I generally think hiring in our industry is just awful. I mean, it's just awful.
It's much better to know somebody in the company and then have them kind of pull you on board than
I mean, there's limits to that, obviously. In general, though, I have been through very few hiring processes that were effective. And we've worked pretty hard on ours at improving, and it's still challenging. I mean, I don't doubt that. I just think when I look at the things that people try to do to handle volume, like the assessments and, that sort of thing. Is like, none of those are going to be very good. I mean, they're just not going to be very good.
Yeah.
I actually would like to see us be willing to spend a little bit of technical people's time on recruiting, because I can find out more about somebody. You say you're an expert in something. Well, I'm going to ask you the question, what's the hardest problem you've ever had to solve in that technology? Because that tells me how much you know about that technology better than any sort of assessment ever will.
Mm-hmm.
If you say you know EF and the biggest problem you've ever had is, a problem with your migration, I don't think you're an expert, because it's never going to be the biggest problem.
Well, everybody has problems with migrations.
Right, but it's never the biggest problem you've ever had unless you've never had any real problems, right?
Right.
I don't know. Like I get that, and I absolutely am down with what you're saying. I don't know if that question specifically is a good one, because first of all, you're kind of putting people on the spot for that, and that's while that is a question, like, okay, maybe you'll be ready for it, but you're not going to have prep for that for every single type of technology that might come up. So you're kind of putting people on the spot for it. Yeah, like I'm just thinking, like I know React really, really well. If you ask me that, like, I don't know what I would answer, because the problem that the hard problem I'm solving is rarely a React problem. It's really a something else problem, and then React just kind of layers on top of it as an implementation.
So then I would just ask you, okay, so how did React interact with that problem, right?
Right.
I want to know if somebody solved a problem in their life,
No, I get that. I just there's probably a better way of asking that gets at it a little better than that particular way of phrasing it.
I will say that I only ask this for people who have lots of experience.
Yeah.
It's not a good question at all
No.
for somebody who's, just out of a coding school or, whatever, right? 2 or 3 years of experience, I don't expect you to run into really tough problems.
Yeah.
If I ask you about what's the hardest thing you've ever done in SQL, and you explained how you had to use having in a subquery, like, you go off on something, like, I know you've actually used SQL at a real deep level, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's been one of the 2 best questions I asked people. The other one is, tell me something you're proud of. So anybody who ever does an interview with me should expect those 2 questions.
Right.
If it were up to me, I'd send them out in advance, because I really would like people to think about it in advance. Because I have no interest in surprising anybody.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, like, well, yeah. So that's one thing you could probably do, is just ahead of time communicate to them that's the questions you'll be asking. They should prep for them. That might actually be a good way of doing it. Yeah, because I might even ask, like, you said entity framework. I'm like, I've done tons of entity framework. Hardest problem? I mean, hardest problem was learning it initially when, it was still like 2008 or whatever. But like that's not really what you're looking for.
Well, no. If like, I'll drill down on people when they give me an answer, because it tells me a lot.
Right.
And a lot of people use entity framework and never run into problems.
Right.
That's not going to help them if they're going to be a consultant at improving, who I'm hiring for right now, right? You need to have, like, run into some problem, right? I mean, so, it's the kind of thing. The other thing I think is we don't think enough about, we call it all software development, but they're not the same kinds of things. Being a corporate developer does not require the same skill set as being a consultant. Doesn't require the same skill set as being in a startup. Yeah, there's overlap, but you have to have a totally different focus on what you're doing. I read an interesting discussion between some people that I follow on Twitter. It was arguing about TDD.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy who started it is like, TDD doesn't do it for me. People I've tried to hire who do TDD, end up failing. And describes and I'll be honest with you, he describes a very common scenario for people who know the mechanics of TDD and don't understand the process behind it. And there's a bunch of TDD advocates that got into it with him. It's like, this discussion is going to go nowhere. It's going to go nowhere because they don't understand the kind of work he does, where TDD is less valuable than the kind of work he does. And, now, that doesn't mean that he doesn't do tests. Like, his project has tons and tons of tests, and it's a high quality project. I've used it. It's just, from his attitude of, a company that is supports an open source project. I mean, that's their business model is, we support an open source project because it's complicated and you need help, right? I mean, and it's just like, I just think people should, think a little bit about what they're hiring for more than, this is a developer, which is a cog, like, yeah, no. I mean, almost anybody can learn the technical stuff. Not everybody, but most people can learn the technical stuff. What most people don't have to be a good developer is just the attitude that it takes.
So the way that I recommend places do it, the way that I did it at Surge, kind of when we grew from like 20 people to 350 people, is that I sat down kind of for each kind of role. And for our software devs, it was mostly the same because it was consulting and we didn't really know where they'd end up ahead of time. But where there was different roles, I did do different ones. But I basically, and this is kind of what I've recommended everywhere since, because it works really well, is you create 5 to 6 categories, right? Just broad scale categories of what leads to the success here. And we're talking like, a category is like communication or or maybe a little more narrow is like ability to talk tech, right? But then you write out like 5 or 6 bullet points, or what are some markers of that? Like, what does that mean to you? And then in each one of them, so initially I was doing 1, 2, or 3. I actually have adjusted that since to be 1, 2, 3, or 4. So you have 4 possible grades within that category. So 4, so there's not like a middle one that nobody can straddle the middle. And you have to give them one of those 4 grades within that category. So 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then, final scores, you just sum them up. So what does that do is that gives you, first of all, it forces you to think through all the categories and how their answers apply to it, and and the categories of how those map to this particular role. Secondly, it gives you some sort of objective, high-level number of how good they are. There's really not going to be a lot of question about someone who scores an 11 versus someone who scores a 6, right? It'll be pretty clear that there's a stark difference. And secondly, it kind of gives you a framing to talk about them further. It's like, all right, so we had like client-facing skills as a category, and they actually did poorly here, but they did really, really good at the understanding the technical details of subcategory, right? And that gives you kind of a framing about where to continue that conversation further, and figuring out whether it really does apply to you or not. So so the end result of the interview is usually this grade, this broken down grade, and then like a write-up for each one. And to me, that's been, and you could do that in a single 2-hour session. You don't need like a bunch of different interviews with a ton of different people or automated anything. That's an hour and a half, 2-hour conversation. And from what I found, like that has given me plenty. Like I feel like we missed rather few times with that approach. Now that might be because we're like consulting, we kind of had places to put people, but that, I found that to be very good.
Yeah, one of the problems that we have is we have almost there are certain types of feedback that we don't get, right? So if you thumbs down somebody, you'll never know in all likelihood if that was a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
I've been around long enough in Houston that I have discovered a couple of times when I made a mistake. That is, I recommended against hiring somebody, and 5 years later I run into them, and I realize that I made a huge mistake, right? But how many people can get that opportunity?
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, and so we always focus on the other kind of mistake, which is we hired somebody and it turned out not to be a good hire, right? And even then, you don't really know if it was a problem with the hiring process
Mm-hmm.
or if it was something else, right? And so without, being able to get feedback on this stuff, I kind of think that it's kind of always going to be a crapshoot.
So that's, yeah. So like the behavioral psychology kind of Bible of Thinking Fast and Slow, Amos Tversky and Kahneman guys. Like that's one of the things they talk about is like expert judgment in areas where you don't get immediate feedback and where it's not very frequent immediate feedback. Like it's bad. Like you might as well be flipping a coin. Sometimes it's worse. And like they were like the one thing that does somewhat work, and this is where I got the category thing, is they propose something similar to that. It's like because that at least gives you an even ground to talk about and forces you to think about things in finer details. So that's actually 100% kind of what led me to this kind of process.
It's
I was
very
thinking
hard.
about it. I was reading this book. I was like, oh, okay.
Very hard to get past this person looks like me. I mean, not necessarily looks like me, but
Right.
this person, I can relate something about this person, so they're a good person. Or
Yep.
This person, I mean,
Absolutely.
I faced hiring decisions where I heard people that were nothing at all like me. And it
Yeah.
was really kind of hard. I'll be honest with you. I think this is true for most people to get past that.
Mm-hmm.
It just is.
Right. Absolutely.
And, so.
Yeah. So the other thing I always try to do is like, especially any of the harder questions. So first of all, I always group interview questions like very specifically in my script, like because remember people need like mental breaks. Context shifting is hard, so you group stuff first of all, so you to minimize context shifting, but then also within each group, just throw some stupid easy questions to them, like ones you don't really care about the answer for, just to prime them to context shift. And then also within that, man, I have so many thoughts on this. I've done this a lot. But so once you kind of have that, but then also for the harder questions for anything, I would always have three different ways I could ask that question. Like three completely different approaches. I'd stop, think about like what am I actually asking about here, and then like three different approaches for how you might ask about that. And like so I might ask directly about like state versus props in React, see if they can answer that. But like that's something they're going to pick up on if they're like good at the terminology and they're keeping up on that. And maybe they're not. So then I always have a way to ask them about like, okay, well, what are some ways you might provide configurations to a component, but also let it do some other things. So like kind of put it in a framing where like they would be thinking about it from their experience. And I always have like a third where I'm like, okay, tell me a story about when you did X, Y, Z. And just like when they're having trouble with one of them, I just kind of go down to the other, because not everyone's kind of thinks about this stuff the same way. So those are kind of some ways that I've managed to, I think, minimize those effects. It's hard to say.
It is hard.
Yeah. And definitely having interviewing scripts is a big thing. People show up without them. It's ridiculous.
You say you're talking about interviewees that don't have a script, or interviewers who don't have a script?
Interviewers. Yeah. Like.
Okay.
Yeah. What are you doing? I'm more prepared than you are. Come on, man. Oh, you asked me to submit a project, and now you're just popping it open and be like, okay, so tell me about this. Like, man, be specific, please.
So what kind of script, George, are you referring to?
So I would actually have I would actually have like all the technical questions written. I would ask them written down, and I specifically right at the top I would have written down like, you don't have to stick to this. Like this is meant to kind of be a way to guide the conversation, but here are the questions, because if you're coming like all that stuff that I just said, that's a lot. Like you have to think about like how to group things, how to arrange the questions. Like you have to do that ahead of time. You can't just like be coming up with and considering all that stuff in the moment, 3 different ways to phrase each one. So yeah, I would always kind of think about it from that angle. And yeah, that means you know, just big Google Doc or something where you have the entire script and like certain areas, like, well, if they know they know a lot about SQL, here's a bunch of SQL questions. If they know about a bunch about Linux admin, here's the Linux admin section, along with kind of a way of breaking it up. Like you wouldn't want to have like a heavily technical area where you're talking about like Linux admin right next to another heavily technical area. Split them up with like the systems design questions or the software design philosophy questions, right? Let them get a little bit of that mental break and palate cleansing. But there's the only way you're going to do that is if you have shit written down beforehand and planned out, and so many people don't.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And if you do that, you don't need as much of these freaking assessments and everything. You're already doing stuff in a standardized manner.
Gotcha. Now, Kenny, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Tying it back.
Yeah.
A little bit. I prefer John's style of interviews a little bit better than just kind of going through and pounding through an interview script.
Well, that's the thing. Like, you don't have to stick to it. Like you don't. It's a script in the sense that, like, all right, here are your guidelines. Here's how you know to group things. That doesn't mean you can't make decisions in the moment and decide to dig down into stuff.
So,
Well, then,
But
I should say, for the most part, then any interview that I've been in where they've had an interview script, they've pretty much followed it top to bottom.
right.
There's a few times where they're just like, okay, we don't need to cover this section kind of thing. But they are following the script. And I just say, I kind of like John's more conversational approach.
So I'll walk through. So right now at Improving, we do a 30-minute phone screen. And the idea is not up or down. The idea is to get an idea of what their level, their technical level is, of whether we would hire somebody as a consultant, senior consultant, or principal. I don't think I'm sharing any secret information here. It does not help you to know this. But I'll explain how I do, because that's mostly the interviewing I'm doing right now. Or I get the technical screens for people with a lot of experience for, fairly obvious reasons. And, trying to get somebody's technical level who's been in business, been in this business for 10, 15, 20 years, in 30 minutes is pretty hard. And I've thought a lot about how to do that. And so I have a script, sort of. So the first part of the conversation is, it's almost really scripted. I ask them, like, this is John from Improving. Is this whatever their name is?
Mm-hmm.
Then I ask them if it's still a good time to talk, because I don't want to get 5 minutes into the interview and find out that they're distracted by the fact that their house is flooded from a burst pipe. That's a thing that happened.
Yeah.
And so if they say yes, and then so I have a little bit where I explain what the interview's for. And then I ask them if they have any questions before we start. I tell them it's going to take 30 minutes or less. And I keep it to 30 minutes. Occasionally I go, never more than 5 minutes over, because I want to keep them all like as close and same as I can. And then I start out, I tell them I'm going to ask open-ended questions. And if I ask them for their opinion on a technology, I don't care if they like it or not. Either one is okay, right? I just want to get to know what makes them tick, right? And then I ask them, what are you proud of? Tell me something in your career that you've done that you're proud of. And that tells you so much about somebody and what makes them tick, right? What kind of developer are they? Because you get an amazing range of answers to that. Some people are really, really proud of some technical thing they've done, and other people are proud of solving a user's problem. Um, and that just I think, and most of the time I will dig down into I'll ask follow-up questions based on what they tell me about, well, so what, how did that work? Just, it depends a lot on what they tell me, but I always want to know more about the project or the problem they solved. And then I ask them, okay, uh, I look at their resume and I have picked out two or three technologies that I want to talk to them about because they will give me an idea of how deep they are technically. Things that they say they've done and they, have done a lot of. It's harder these days because everybody's gotten into the mode of put every technology they've ever touched on the resume.
Mm-hmm.
So you actually have to read the resumes to figure out what they're really, had spent a lot of time on. And then I say, okay, so for this technology, tell me what's the hardest problem you've ever solved. And sometimes people can't think of them, and I move on to something else. In those cases, I'll come back later because 90% of the time, somebody who can't think of it when you first ask them, by the time you get with 10 minutes left in the interview, they'll have thought of something, right? But you just go through all these technologies, and if they can't come up with the hardest thing ever done, it's like, okay, well, tell me how you use, whatever. And I always try to pick something that I know a lot about. By the way, if you ever interview with me, for the love of God, don't put MSNQ on your resume. Not because I have anything against it, because I know way more about it than I ever wanted to. No, but I try to avoid interviewing people who are just front end because I don't feel comfortable doing that sort of thing on front end technologies. Some people might think I'm an expert, but I sure don't think I'm an expert.
Mm-hmm.
But it did, as I work through that, I get people talking about the things they've done in their career. I always ask a process question, like, are you familiar with Scrum or Agile? How I phrase that question depends a lot on whether or not they mention it on their resume. But it's something that we need to know. We need to know what sort of exposure they've had. So if somebody tells me they've been a team lead, and the people I've interviewed 10, 15 years, I expect them to at some point have been a team lead, unless they're really, really good at something, which, I mean, I'm okay with that, right? I know some people who are assembly language programmers who are still working as assembly language programmers. Like, they've never been a team lead, but boy, they know that. If we had a need for one, we'd be hiring them. But anyway, um, then I ask them what process they used in their team. How did they get their work done? Um, it's amazing. Sometimes people won't come up with, Agile or Scrum or anything like that. But when I ask them, okay, well, so how did you get your priorities?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that tells me a lot. A lot of people who've been around a while have spent a lot of time basically responding to bug reports, like production bug reports. That's a super valuable skill. You're limited if that's all you've ever done. It's still, and so at that point, you know, we will have spent 30 or 25 minutes generally. And the last 5 minutes, I give them a chance to so, A, is there something that you wanted me to ask that I didn't ask? And most people say no, but the people who say yes, you get stuff, you find so much interesting stuff about those people when they tell you, when they answer that question. And then the other question is so do you want to ask me anything? Like anything about improving or, that sort of thing. And generally people have the same sort of responses, but, you know, it gives them a chance to feel comfortable. Um, and after having been on one side or other of an interview process for 30 years, one of my goals is to make people feel like that it was worth their time, whether they got the job or not. Like it should, to me, it could be a good conversation. It's like, hey, I spent 30 minutes talking about stuff I like, right? Whereas most interview processes, you get out of them, and I mean, at least I've always kind of, well, not always, but most of my interview processes, I've kind of like not enjoyed them. The most fun I ever had being on the other side of an interview was, the interview I had with Improving. Because I got to talk about messaging systems with somebody who was an expert, and it was awesome. It was an awesome conversation. So that's my basic approach to interviewing. When I do longer interviews, one of my goals is to, like, I really appreciate it when people leave the interview saying, that's the most fun I've ever had in an interview. And I get that fairly frequently. So I'm kind of proud of that because I think it should be. Mm-hmm. It should be a pleasant experience. I really don't like the companies that try to make it, like they're trying to make it like it's a marathon. They bring you in for six hours of interviews with 12 different people. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever been through one of those, but they're exhausting.
Yeah, they are. No, I don't like those are ridiculous. Yeah, just the constant series of them. I mean, I know people think it's the humane thing is to offer, hire someone for a week of work and you pay them and stuff like that. It's but that doesn't really work. You're hiring them because you're then I'll learn how they work. Except you didn't do any of the onboarding that you normally would do.
Yeah.
And also you're giving me a project that you did the estimate for. And I didn't do the estimate. I didn't commit to that timeline. I had one once where they were like, okay, can you just slap together an OAuth server for us? And I'm like, hold on, what? First of all, an OAuth server by itself is not a thing. You've got to, OAuth is not a technology. It's it's a very, very loose standard. You've got to define a heck of a lot more than that. And it's just, what do you want from me? So at the end of I think I did 28 hours for them or something. I was what I can give you is an in-depth write-up of what exactly you need to decide if you want to have an OAuth server. But you haven't told me any of the stuff necessary for this. Yeah. 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 The weird thing about those what are you most proud of questions, I you were just saying that, I would think about it if it was coming unprompted, I just don't think about the stuff in terms of tech. So you asked me the first thing I'd answer probably setting up this interview process that was very successful. Well, that's not really what we're looking for, but next one, working with a bunch of junior people and guiding them to success, or guiding clients.
One of my favorite answers if somebody told me that.
Yeah. But or guiding clients who really didn't know what the heck they wanted, but helping them figure it out. And I understand, but that's, I'm also not answering anything about technology there. You come away with impression that maybe I'm a great manager, but that's not really what I might be going for. So it is strange. You probably, my opinion is that you probably have to guide people a little more to what you want. But
and sometimes I do, especially if they don't have an instant answer. You'd be surprised at how many developers, with 10 or more years of experience, immediately know what they want to say to that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because
they've had some experience in their career that was just really above the others.
Right.
And if people don't know how to answer that question, I give them examples.
Yeah.
I'll pick, let's just think about this job on your resume. Usually it's the most recent one. It's what were you doing there that worked well? I'm a little worried about people who start out by responding it was all awful, because everything, all of it, I'm a pretty negative person. I can find good things in all the jobs I've had, even the terrible ones.
Right. Yep.
Anyway, I think to some extent people have to do this kind of stuff for themselves. I mean, you have to figure out what works for you. At the same time, I have just completely rejected the sort of multiple choice kind of approach to things. Like, tell me the difference between IEnumerable and iQueryable. Yeah, I could spend 30 minutes talking about that, but man, I don't want to. I mean,
see that's it, because that is like one of the questions I asked, but I also like that's not the end of it. That's just like that first question where like, all right, let's see if that gets you talking. Right. And if not, I have other.
I brought that one up because I think that's one of the better ones.
Right. I mean,
I really do in terms of because there's not really an answer. I mean, there's an answer.
Yeah.
But it's not as simple as anybody thinks it is.
Right.
And if somebody says, if they struggle with that question, that's okay. Mm-hmm. A lot of people who use those properly every day can't really answer that question because that's not how their brain works, right? Mm-hmm. And that gets back to your point about asking it, different ways, right?
Yeah.
And so I try to do questions that get people to talk about things in their own way. And I do think it's a problem. You kind of hit on this a little bit. It's like sometimes it's a problem when they're trying to figure out what I'm looking for. Like I can sometimes tell people like, what does he want to hear? Because that's how they've been conditioned for interviews. And so I really try to make a point. It's like, I just want you, and I know that there's HR people that say that and they mean just the opposite. It's like, it drives me nuts. But, the best I can do is be honest with people and hope they'll be honest with me.
Yeah. That's so. Like I said, that is a question I asked. Like, this is actually like a caveat of like another thing about interviewing. So like another like one of the alternate ways I have of asking that, which it usually does come down to, to propose it is like something. Okay, let's say you're using Entity Framework and you have a user class, and user has a first name, last name, and then a get full name method on the class. And then, so you are now just writing a EF select statement, and you use just the get full name method. So you call so db.users.select u.get full name, and you get an error. But if you put a to array before that, you don't get an error. What's going on with that? And like probably like 50% of the time, people will be like, yes, I've run into this. I have no idea what is going on with it. And then you get to like tell them, which first of all, it's good to see how they react to learning something they didn't know. And secondly, if people who are really good are picking between have their choice of places to go to, a good percentage of the time they want to go to places where they can learn something.
Yeah.
So like there are ringers I build into my interview where it's like, someone's probably not going to know the answer, but it'll give me a chance to teach someone something, and it'll attract them to this opportunity. Like they definitely do that, like sneaky stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah.
I dig it.
Cool.
Very good. Yeah, thanks, Tony, for raising that question.
Yeah.
But you didn't think you'd get a 45-minute answer, did you?
50 almost.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm just here doing my job. So.
There you go. Yeah, that was a great conversation. And it's interesting how like this kind of topic or related topic comes up quite frequently here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Yeah. All right. What did you want to talk about, Claudia?
There's small things. One is I'm actually using my Surface laptop, the replacement that I got. So a little update on that. Because last year, like sometime in December, I mentioned that I had some problems with my Surface laptop, and then mostly the latest problem was the main screen was not working anymore, but since I'm connected to 2 external monitors, I was still able to use the computer for a little while because there were things that I wanted to finish on that computer before turning it in. So last week or 10 days ago, I actually went through the whole, warranty thing and filed a claim and then sent the computer back. And then I just got a replacement like yesterday or 2 days ago. Right now it's working fine. But the thing that still amuses me is that all the communication that I got from Microsoft ends up in the junk folder. And it's coming to my Hotmail Outlook account. Everything they send me goes to the junk email folder. And I noticed also that like all this communication about the warranty claim and all that, it's coming from an Xbox.com domain.
Yeah, a lot of their stuff comes from Xbox.com now, and I don't get that at all.
Yeah, I was so confused. Like, I don't understand, guys. If you don't trust your own emails, why should I? But anyways, so that was one thing. And the other thing, just a quick update. Last 2 evenings, I was back to just doing some learning on Flutter. Still interesting. It is still a technology that I want to look a little more into. Now, last night, like I'm following a Pluralsight course, and it drives me insane when I'm following some sort of tutorial that's showing me how to do like the simplest thing, and then I get stuck. It's like you're following every single step, and then something is not compiled or it's not running, and the messages that you get is like, okay, if I'm running into this to do the simplest thing, what about the intermediate and hard stuff? So that one like kind of put me off, last night, because like I shouldn't be having trouble to do something like this. This is too trivial to face trouble. So that's like, and I'm still not happy with using the language Dart to describe UIs, because as you start nesting certain UI elements, right? So at the top you see, okay, I have this thing here that wraps up this thing here, and then as you keep going down the list, and then at the bottom you see all of these curly braces, parentheses, semicolons, and it's like, that is awful. You see like 20 lines just of the closing things. It's awful. I cannot get over that. Or things like, if you want to apply some padding to an element that you have there, I would expect padding to be like an attribute on the thing, but not in Flutter. You wrap everything up in a padding element, and then you may want to wrap all of that up into something else. It's like,
yeah, but you probably abstract that realistically, right? Like realistically, you would abstract that in a custom like container component that's specific to your application, right?
maybe,
I would assume.
yeah, it bugs me.
Yeah.
It's like I don't want to add these things to a padding element. I want to make this thing padded with, right? It's just this flow that they have, it feels very, very unnatural to me. So that part I'm not digging. But like I said, I still want to pursue it a little more, learn a little more. And like every time I'm learning something new like this, I do, because all of these tutorials, they never show you like the proper way, the clean way of doing things, right? So whenever I'm learning something like this, I do a little search like clean code in React, clean code in Flutter, to see what I find out there. And when I did a little search like that for Flutter, I didn't find anything that was like, yes, that's what I would expect. I still see like, yeah, it's a little bit better than the tutorial, but it's like, is that really how people are writing code out there? What are the best practices, right? Not finding anything like that yet that I like. So that was that. I just wanted to give you guys an update on that.
Yeah. I, in the meantime, have been messing with moving everything over to a Linux box the last week.
Okay, everything, like everything?
Like, well, yeah, because I have MacBook Pro, but I still have it, but like it does belong to my old job. And like I asked them about it, and they were like, yeah, we'll ask you to bring it in at some point, but it's fine. But I do want to get off of it, so I bought like a ThinkPad Yoga, which is nice. And like I don't really want to use Windows. Last time I tried, Emacs ran like crap on it. So I'm like, screw it. I'll set up Ubuntu. And that's been like I don't. I get Linux more now than I did like 5, 10 years ago when I tried it, but I still don't really get it. And it's not like I really get Windows either. Stuff mostly just works in it. Like I really just want to boot to Emacs and live in it because like I do. It's super complex, but I do understand like the design logic there, like how it works and how you're supposed to debug stuff. And with Linux, it's supposed to be like that, except you just have to know where everything is. Like, oh, these wrong variables are in my path. Here's one that happened. Okay, so in order to be able to do a boot, kind of the way I had it recommended to me is you shrink your Windows partition, you set up another partition that's going to be used just for Ubuntu, and then another big partition for all your user data. Now that big partition has to be NTFS because Ubuntu wants ext4 file system and Windows won't read ext4 by default. So okay, so you do that. Then when you're installing it, you install Ubuntu on the Ubuntu partition, and then you want your home directory to be on that new partition, not inside of the Ubuntu one. So you have to get rid of your actual home directory and mount this external partition as the home directory. And you could do that totally in terminal, but that's only for a little while. If you want to make it permanent, you have to go and edit the fstep file, which is like, I mean, it's not a big complex thing, but it's a completely different thing. Now, here's what I did. I accidentally, in the fstep file, said this other partition was xdef4 when really it's NTFS. Everything seemed to work. I reboot my computer, comes up with the Ubuntu screen, type in my password, and comes up with the Ubuntu screen again and asks me for my password. And just stuck in that loop. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? And eventually I like reading through some posts. If I hit Control-Alt-F3, it'll allow you to drop into a terminal which doesn't need your home directory. And from then I was able to figure out it's because it failed to mount my home directory, but it just didn't feel like giving an error or anything. Like it's like so wild. Oh, and then like, well, Dropbox is a big part of my workflow because that's where I store my entire note-taking system. Dropbox does not run on NTFS if you're in Linux. So I had to create another partition just for Dropbox in ext4 and symlink everything. And it's like, oh my God, like this is sort of beating your head against the wall like every damn time.
Oh man, that's so beyond anything I would put up with. Like no, I don't
Windows,
have that.
Emacs didn't work in Windows last I tried. It's
Man.
Well, maybe you should try Windows subsystem for Linux and use Emacs that way.
I did try it. So the big problem there, like setting up running the GUI one from there. I mean, that was over my head because you have to like X11 or something like that.
Did you do it on WSL 1 or 2?
That was WSL 1. Now the other problem,
all that stuff is supposed to be better on 2. I don't use it myself, so I can't really say. But people I know who are big Linux people are like they tolerate it with version 2.
Yeah, I've heard that, and I will be trying it. But then again, so like to get the graphical Emacs from inside of WSL because there's no desktop environment. So either way, you need to like do something with X11, forwarding X11. I don't freaking know how to do that or how that works. And then when I did manage to like just in terminal mode boot it, what I found was like half of the plugins just didn't work. And I mean, again, maybe that's better with WSL2. But that was like the big showstopper for me. Actually, like I bought a Surface Book 2 and like I returned it because I was like, I can't use this because it was rough. Dual booting in Ubuntu is passable so far, but it's weird. There's definitely lots of little things that are annoying.
I have the opposite problem to you. I have a lot of background in knowing how Windows works at a really low level. It's like I have no desire to try to approach that kind of level of knowledge of some other OS. I mean, I don't have anything against them. It's just like it's not worth the effort.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know if I've told you guys this story, but I'll probably tell you some other time again. My younger son, one of my younger sons, got a job working as a for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a budget analyst.
Mm-hmm.
And so a couple of weeks after he started, he sends me this text message and says, "Hey, Dad, do you have any experience using the SAP GUI?"
Mm-hmm.
And my response to him was, "Roll initiative." Anyway, it turned out it was a problem with ActiveX. Yes, indeed. The government, well, U.S. Fish and Wildlife uses SAP to a web browser, so it has to be Internet Explorer because ActiveX doesn't work anywhere else. And, they have Chrome and Internet Explorer on their government-issued laptops, but he said, like, "Oh, you mean they were serious when they said I had to use IE for this?" I said, "Yeah, they're serious. Like, you have to do that." And I was like, "Man, it's been 10 years since I gave any ActiveX support help out." Like, reset my days since using ActiveX support,
Yeah.
36,000 and something. But
Wow.
yeah, so it's one of those things where sometimes you just have to know somebody. And if you don't know anybody, my advice, if it's a Windows issue, just go on Twitter and ask Scott Hanselman. If he doesn't know the answer, he probably knows who at Microsoft knows the answer and will call them for you. I mean, I swear, he's the nicest guy on Twitter, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Good time to wrap things up. Thanks, guys. It was a great conversation. Thanks for joining in, and hope to see you all back next week.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Guys, enjoy
Thank you.
the day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.